Tax boy said, oh, wait a minute, you got that listed for a hell of a lot higher than you got appraised at, which was true, because I kept my tax rate low. When I did sell it, it reverted back up to where it should have been. And that's something that I think that would happen here if you so write the tax freeze. That once that property changes hands to somebody who doesn't qualify for that tax freeze, bring the house back up going forward to the appraised value it should be. And in my case, I held my house at about $250 and I sold it for $500. In Michigan, we had what was called the Headley Act, which forced everything down to about 1983 rates. If you look back on your chart, you can see there's difference in rates. But when I sold it, it should have been up $600,000-700,000, and they did pay that much. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Rich.
Thank you, Richard.
Pat Hunter.
My name is Pat Hunter, and I'm here to speak about the senior citizens tax freeze. But before I do that, I would like to know what the status is of the architect RFQ. Can anybody give me an update where you are in the process?
For the courthouse?
For
No, for
the architect for the storage facility.
Gary.
I haven't been given the information yet.
So you haven't even started, basically?
No, ma'am. We, at our last meeting, we voted to do a committee and to do a review of that, and we've not received that information
Okay.
as of from 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
Gary, myself, and Matt are supposed to receive the packets and do an individual assessment and send it back into Tracy. That's right, isn't it, Tracy?
Susan, purchasing.
That's right.
So we approved that 2 weeks ago.
Okay. The other thing is, and I'm not here in a formal capacity, I'm here in an informal capacity, just to give you an update on the public records. We have 2 estimates from 2 vendors with regards to cleaning the records. So we'll be getting those shortly, and then the purchasing director will decide what she wants to do with regards to cleaning the records. We still have the bulk of the records that belong to the trustee and to the chancery clerk that have to be inventoried. So we have to get that addressed before we send those records off. Mr. Miller's here, maybe he can address it.
I think he's about to.
Well,
I think he is. He's
we
standing up.
have some, but the majority of the 800 boxes, a super majority are, will be archived. They will be the old trustee books. They will be cleaned and hopefully restored back to what they were. But still, there's a lot of paperwork that needs to be looked at. And I think I've spoken to the budget committee about this. Someone has to do the inventory. So the other thing that I would like to talk about is the tax freeze. And I know you're going to have some people here to talk about the actual program, which I welcome. But I'd like to talk about the actual vote that took place in 2006. And that was where the voters of Loudon County approved the amendment to Article 2, Section 28 of the Tennessee Constitution, giving the General Assembly the authority by general law to authorize counties and municipalities to implement a local option property tax freeze for taxpayers 65 years of age or older. The vote was 12,451 yes and 2,431 no. I think the will of the people is real important when they vote on Constitution amendments, whether they vote to elect candidates to office, I think that it's important that we honor the vote. I have been looking at information also with regards to the tax, the property tax over the years, certainly not as comprehensive as we were given today. But I have also been looking at the property tax and also the fund balance. And if I go back to the year 2006 and 7, where we actually started with this vote, the fund balance for the county, I'm not talking about the schools, not talking about the highway department, just the county and the 101. And we started off with $3,663,456. Over 1, 2, 3, 4. About 15 or 16 years later, we're up to $10,223,912. Now, along the way, we did have property tax increases, but still, the county has enjoyed nice, healthy fund balances without taking into account the school's fund balance. Back in 2006 and 7, it was $4,374,656. This year, or the ending fiscal year 21, it is $5,539,797. There's quite a difference in the school and the county fund balance. I feel that County Commission has given some tax breaks to industry, Kate and Lyle, $1 million, to other industries, and I think it's time to give back to the seniors of this community. This year's audit, like I mentioned, the county and the school, the highway, public works, their fund balance is 1.3. Education debt is 7.7. General capital projects, 4 million, a little bit over 4 million. Non-major funds, other governmental funds, 5.2, for a total of 28,625,000. The other thing that I'd like to mention is something that I found in the CTAS tax book of 2020. I've heard in the budget meetings about the value of our penny. And I've always been amazed about the value of our penny. I found a 2020 CTAS book, and it's talking about the revenue generated on 1 cent of the property tax rate. Out of 95 counties, Loudon County is about 17th. And we seem to run with the big dogs. There's Shelby County, Davidson, Knox, and along the way, we're about 17th there. At that point, we were 180,833. But there were others that we were pretty close to. So that's pretty significant in my opinion, as far as the number of parcels that we have and our great assessments. We're bringing in a lot of tax dollars. And I feel it's just time to give back to the seniors who have been paying their taxes, have done it, and it's just time to, in my opinion, to give back. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Chip, you want to address the concern of your records?
Yeah, thank you. Obviously, Ms. Hunter's not been doing her job or been up to the facility, because on November 9th, I started sending this all to you guys, I just wanted it to all go away. My staff and I spent the better part of a day, part of my staff. We filed all the boxes, I'll be glad to email you all this. Everything is marked, every box is marked. They've all been tagged with what's inside. She's obviously not been up there. This was on November 9th. She's not doing her job, and I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but there's plenty of other stuff that's not marked in there. By far, mine wasn't the only thing in there. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is all your stuff done?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
No, I trust you.
Or you can live at my house.
Your
office.
Your office.
Mr. Chairman.
Hey,
Yes.
If you say it's done, it's done.
I'd like to bring this before the commission for FYI. I have talked to the city of Loudon, and I have approached the city of Loudon to write a letter of endorsement, and also hopefully from the county. Dr. Patel and Dr. Rahman are currently in a facility that is about 5,000 square feet. There's a lot of residents in Loudon, Tellico Village, and the space they have is very inadequate for the number of patients that they have. Now, the building there itself is owned, if I'm not mistaken, by Covenant. This letter of endorsement we would request is to send to Covenant and request they find land inside the city, hopefully, and build a new facility that would meet the needs now and in the future, because we're gonna be seeing a lot of growth. City of Loudon is gonna be adding possibly 1,500 beds by between now and 2025. The village, I don't know what it will do, but it's just something that's of concern to me, and I would propose that Covenant pay for the whole thing. All they're gonna do is say yes or no, but the thing about it, it would give them a very strong presence in the city of Loudon and make sure that we have doctors here, because we've got basically 3 or 4 doctors that are gonna be retiring in the next couple of years, and that is of grave concern to me and a lot of other people within the city and this area. So as soon as we get that information, the numbers and all, I'll get that back and the letter to the mayor, and we'll send those with the city as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
no problem. Commissioner Whitfield, tell us about the tax freeze and tax relief.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to bring this in front of us today and talk about tax freeze and tax relief. I agree with Ms. Hunter. It's time that we take a look at our elderly residents or low-income residents on either tax freeze or tax relief. I'm not sure, and I want to do this today so I can learn the differences between a tax freeze and tax relief. As Commissioner Shaver always says, the best way to do a tax freeze is not have a property tax increase. And we've been very fortunate not to have to do that. But I'm trying to figure out and look for an impact for our elderly and low income. So we have Mike and Chip are here today, and man, they've been instrumental in gathering some information and helping get this together. So if it pleases everyone, I'd like to ask Mr. Campbell to come up and go over some information with us and introduce some folks and hopefully educate us some here.
So thank you for the opportunity, commissioners, mayor, guests. Today I had a request earlier on from Commissioner Whitfield to get some information on tax freeze. So the best thing I could do is contact the state. So I reached out to the comptroller of the Treasury's Division of Property Assessments, and I'm privileged to introduce today Brian Kinsey is the director, and Ryan Dugan is the assistant director. And I think they've got a presentation for you guys to take in and get all the facts. And so I think it's might be a lengthy process, might be short, but there's a lot of information that I think we should all be aware of and consider when we're taking on the programs that we have. I'm going to cut my presentation short and just turn it right over to Brian and Ryan, the duo here, and we'll keep going forward.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay.
Can you need to go back off of your, you just
Okay,
let me know.
appreciate it, thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the county commission. This microphone picks up really well, doesn't it? As Mike said, my name is Brian Kinsey. I'm the director of the Comptroller's Division of Property Assessments, and it is my pleasure to be here to speak with y'all tonight about tax freeze and tax relief. I will tell you, I've never actually done this presentation before, so this is gonna be, I know the material, but I've never actually stood and presented it before. So if I'm a little rusty, it's because I've never done it.
Can you tell us real quick what we have already currently in place, just to educate all of us?
Yes, you have property tax relief.
Okay.
Some of the slides will go into the differences, but in a nutshell, property tax relief is not optional. It's a required program.
And that's the 4 things listed right here?
That's correct.
Okay,
That's
thank you.
correct. Whereas tax freeze is optional.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll just go on through this. What are the basics of tax freeze? As a citizen pointed out earlier, it comes from our Constitution, Article 2, Section 28, approved in November 2006. It's also codified in our state law, in Tennessee Code Annotated 675-705. There are administrative rules adopted by the State Board of Equalization that tell us how to administer the program. Those were adopted in January 2008. You're gonna hear a recurring theme in some of these slides. I'll go ahead and emphasize it now, and you'll hear me emphasize it again. The basic thing to know about tax freeze is that the taxes are frozen, the property taxes. It seems obvious, yes, sir.
So quick question, just, it's come up before. So if they're frozen and they go down, what happens?
They can go down.
Okay.
We do have a slide that discusses that. It wasn't always like that. That was changed in the law at some point to ensure that a taxpayer would have the ability to have their taxes also lowered. It is a local option. The qualifications, homeowner, the property owner must be 65 years old by December 31 of the tax year in which they're applying. So if they're applying for tax year 2022, they could be 64 today, as long as they're 65 by the end of this year, within this tax year. They must own their primary residence. They have to meet certain income requirements. They have to file an annual application. That application is made with, we'll go into that, I think, in some subsequent slides, but it is made with the trustee's office in the county level. Administered by the county trustee or at the city level, city collecting official, with the assistance and cooperation, collaboration, communication, so forth of the assessor of property. Cooperation between these offices is crucial. There's a lot of communication that has to go on between the assessor and the trustee to effectively administer the program.
I have another question on that.
Yes, sir.
Slide. The own their own property, paid off or have a loan on the property?
It doesn't matter either way.
It has to be their primary residency.
That's correct. As long as they have a deed to it.
But
As long as they have a deed to it, they can't rent it.
But it can't be rented.
That's right, that's right. So the income limits vary by county. They're not the same across the state. They're adjusted annually by the cost of living, Social Security cost of living. So is tax relief. There's the minimum income limit equals tax relief income for elderly applicants. Some of the bullet points after this will clarify what I mean by that a little bit. For tax year 2022, the minimum income is $31,600. But like I said, this varies by county. The maximum income, according to which county you're in, is $56,790. So that's the spectrum right there, somewhere between, depending on what county you're in. And I know you're sitting there thinking, well, what about this county? Hopefully the next bullet point answers that, yes. In Loudon County, where you fall on that spectrum, it is $42,120. That's for tax year 2022. Of course, this gets adjusted annually. I know you're not gonna be able to read that. This is actually an excerpt from our, one of the pages on our comptroller website. It lists the counties and the cities across the state that have adopted tax freeze. I do not have a hard copy of this. Y'all already have it?
I made them a copy.
Okay. So then you already know, there's 23 out of 95 counties that have adopted tax freeze across the state. And there's 33 out of, whatever, how many cities are there? Right at 300, right about 300 cities, give or take. I won't dwell on that, you have the information. So once again, it's the tax amount that is frozen, and you may be thinking, why does he keep telling us that? I'm gonna explain that as we go through this. It's not the property value, it's not the value that your assessor, Mike Campbell, places on the property. That can continue to change even under a tax freeze. It's not the assessment, which what that means is if it's a residential property, the assessment is 25% of the appraised value, commercial property 40%. Again, it's a product of the assessor's office. It's not the value, it's not the assessment, it's not the tax rate. You can change the tax rate, and that tax rate gets applied even up to a person that's on tax freeze, but the calculated tax amount is frozen. So we'll go into that a little bit more also. But through the administration of the program, the assessor and trustee do have to work together to calculate what is the calculated tax and then what is the frozen tax. So whatever that tax amount is at the year they qualify, it'll be frozen, but they still continue to calculate what the taxes would have been on the property. So there was a question about, and probably a lot of you have a question wanting to understand a little bit more about what the differences are. So between tax freeze and tax relief. Property tax relief has been
One
around.
question,
Yes,
can you
sir.
have both? Can one person get them both?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Property tax relief has been around a lot longer. It was established in 1973, also in our Constitution. Whereas property tax freeze was established after the Constitution and then enacted into law. It became effective in 2007. Tax freeze does not replace tax relief. They are not mutually exclusive. One does not replace the other. Persons can be eligible for both. And I think y'all already, we were having a sidebar conversation earlier about this bullet point here but it's worth noting that in this, I believe Loudon County is one of these, some jurisdictions have adopted tax relief supplemental programs instead of, or in addition to tax freeze. And I believe your trustee said that you have a matching tax relief program, is that right?
100%.
100%. So whatever a tax recipient's tax relief amount is calculated by the state, it looks like Loudon County matches it up to 100%. So you're helping folks that are on tax relief with a matching program. Similarities and differences exist, which we'll continue to go into.
1 second, please.
Yes, sir.
Would you flip that very first light switch closest to this other, I think this end? That's better. It's just, the glare was awful right
Okay.
here.
Good.
Thank you.
While we're paused
Yes,
right
sir.
here, I know this program like anything else, what is the amount of paperwork and manpower that goes into administering this? Cause is it something they have to come into the office and fill out the paperwork
Yes,
and
sir.
file it in person, or is it online? I know, is it something that can be taken care of within the normal workday from the employees we already have? Or is it an extensive program that's gonna require additional employees to handle the paperwork?
That is a fair and excellent question, and as you can imagine, it would vary a lot by jurisdiction, depending on how, some offices may be already short-staffed, and some may not be. So that would, in terms of whether it require more staff, I would not be able to answer that question. There is some administrative overhead. I mean, there is an application process annually. Each property that's on tax freeze has to be reviewed annually. Some sort of, like I said, cooperation between the trustee and assessor's office to verify ownership and values and whether or not that property might have changed. And,
Are those gonna be, the other thing too is, how friendly are those forms, as our population ages and so forth, the ability to sit down and fill out forms and come up with the right amount and so forth? Like I said, is it, I know you've probably seen some of the counties have, are they an extensive number of questions requiring, I know they have to come up with income and property and
Yes,
so forth,
yes,
but
sir.
I just worry about as they get a little older, how, we're gonna have to have somebody there at the office to actually sit down and help them or send them to H&R Block.
Okay, so it's not that complicated.
Okay.
They're not gonna have to hire an accountant or H&R Block or anyone like that, but I mean, so property tax relief has already existed in the state since, we'd say 1973.
That's that.
The application for tax freeze would be no more complicated than the tax relief application. And each applicant is gonna vary. I'm sure some are gonna fly through them, and then some are gonna have to sit down with someone in the trustee's office and say, will you help me with this?
Right.
So it's gonna vary a lot. I wouldn't say it's an overly burdensome application, and it is a standard application across the state. It's not like some jurisdictions have a simple one and some have a complicated one.
Right.
It's uniform across the state.
Okay.
But I would say it's in terms of complexity for the applicant, I would say it's no more complex than the tax relief application.
If a tax freeze were initiated by the county, how in-depth would the documentation my biggest concern is there any way that, I'm talking about back in the school systems on free and reduced lunches. That is nothing but abuse of money. Now, are they it's based upon a household and the number within the household, I would assume. Now, the documentation that they present to qualify for this, does it have to be validated? Or what are some of the validations in order for a person to qualify?
So, if I understood you correctly, you mentioned about number of residents in a household. It's not related to that. It's purely income of the owners. If there's one owner of the house, then it's that person's income. If there's two owners, then it would be their combined income. So it's not about the number of residents, it's just the income.
What if somebody has like a trust, and the trust pays all the expenses? And that's
Oh my goodness.
That's
I didn't bring anyone from our general counsel's office. That gets really complicated. I believe, before we get back to that.
Sorry.
I think you had a 2 or 3 part question, and I only touched on one aspect.
I use the example of free and reduced lunches in the
You were talking about how much effort is it to verify, validate, that type of thing.
To me, I think they should be validated every 30 days. They're not one time per year.
Right.
And that was abused quite a bit. And I think Commissioner Satterfield could qualify to tell on that as well.
So in this case, it is an annual application and verification process. Since we're talking about the county level, I'll just talk about the trustee. So the trustee's office would have to receive that application, and it would have to review the paperwork submitted and be satisfied that that person has met the requirements. For tax, that's for tax freeze. For tax relief, it's a little more complex in that we have an entire staff in the Nashville office that reviews all the applications on tax relief. And we also have access to data from the Social Security Administration. There's a lot more state dollars, a lot more state overhead invested in administering the tax relief program because it is a state-funded, state-mandated program. But tax freeze, it's a local option and more of a locally administered program. So the trustee would need to receive and review the income data to approve or disapprove the application.
Thank you.
Yes.
If someone qualifies for the relief, do they automatically qualify for the freeze?
The vice versa. Am I saying that right, Ryan?
If you qualify for relief, you've met that minimum 31,000
Yeah.
income, then you would qualify for tax relief if you make application, but you have to make application.
Right. Interesting, and honestly, I don't remember if this is on one of these slides or not, but you will remember that I talked about with tax freeze, the income limit varies by county. It varies by, I forget the exact formula, it's expressed in our statute, but it has something to do with like median income levels within that county. So Loudon County was what, 41 or so thousand?
42, 120.
All right, but tax relief, it is a level playing field across the entire state. And it's just $1, one income limit that's applied everywhere.
And it drops down to 31,000.
And it's a lower number.
Yeah, it drops
Right.
down to 31,000.
So, if you, in Loudon County, for example, if you were to qualify for tax freeze, then yes, you would automatically be eligible for tax relief because the tax freeze income limit is higher. It doesn't mean you're automatically on tax relief. You have to apply for both. Y'all have some
And the
excellent
tax, and the
questions.
tax-free, these are the areas for tax-free
Relief,
Tax relief.
relief.
what
It's
we do
confusing,
now.
isn't it?
Disabled.
That pamphlet that y'all are holding is exclusively property tax relief. That is a state mandated, state funded program at about, it's $41-42 million a year, something like that. I forget if it's 41.8 or 42.8, somewhere around $42 million a year.
Well, the number one qualifying thing then for tax freeze has to be age.
Age and income,
Yeah.
right. None of those other things talk about veteran, disability, things like that. Tax freeze is purely age and income.
So currently, today, on tax relief, the state gives us $140 per residency, and then we match that 100%, is that correct?
It's gonna vary how much the state, it depends on that person's property tax bill and which category they fall in, whether they're the low-income elderly or they're disabled veteran.
Chip?
I'll give it on the sheet, Ron.
Okay, sorry.
So if you look down at, this is just this sheet, it's got a breakdown of basically, the different categories. Disabled, elderly pay the same amount. That's 110 from the state, we match that. Veterans and widows of disabled veterans, is $664. The county also matches that up to the tax bill. So right now, if you just look at what the state spends for those folks, it's $167.64, as is our obligation to match the 160. If you see on the far right-hand side, I've circled 118. Those are new applicants this year that are not counted in those numbers.
And now, Chip, let's say somebody's tax, let's say a veteran's tax bill is $700.
Uh-huh.
We just have to make that difference up of the 664 to get them to 700.
That's exactly right.
Perfect, thank you.
How much does the county currently contribute to this, not counting the new 118?
They match it, doesn't it?
Well,
We
but
match it, but a lot of times, like Commissioner Waller was saying, that we don't, especially in disabled veterans, it would not exceed their bill. So I don't know the answer to your question, man.
Well, I see the 160,000
That's
down,
our liability.
the counties.
Yeah, because the state's paying that much. And so let's say that everybody, their tax bill was higher than 210 or 13, whatever. Then
But the county's actually contributing the 160,
No, the state's contributing 160.
but we
We may,
match it.
but
Up to
we
their
don't match
tax bill.
everybody.
yeah.
Where does that come from, Tracy?
How does it come into the county?
How does it get paid? How do we do that?
Oh, at the end of the fiscal year, the county general fund writes a check to the trustee.
Does the taxpayer then get the money back, or do they not ever pay it? Is it reimbursement, or is it,
Couple scenarios there. If you're just signing up for it for the first time, you would actually have to pay your tax bill. You have to be current and paid, which is a challenge sometimes for the folks that are qualifying for this. They have to be caught up, and then they will be reimbursed one check from the trustee's office, one check from the state of Tennessee. Going forward, they would just come up with the difference in the money, and we settle it in-house.
and the state would pay you and the county would pay you to make up for the difference?
Yes.
But the first time, it's reimbursement.
Yeah, and the other option on that, if, let's say your taxes are escrowed, then the checks will actually be written to the applicant and sent to them.
To the, whoever's got the escrow.
Just the opposite. We'll take the escrow money first.
I see.
And then we give the applicant his money.
So, hey, Chip, real quick before you sit down, so it looks like the state is contributing $160,764. I didn't want the perception to go out, and I may be wrong, that the county is matching that 160,000.
We do.
So we're matching 100, so we pay out 160.
No,
No.
we pay
No.
up to 167.64. If, let's say, a disabled lady has a tax bill of $200, we're gonna take the state's 110 first, and then we'd only use $90 of the county's money.
We're gonna spend the state's money first.
Right, we're gonna spend the state's money.
Same way with disabled veterans,
And the state
that
will
that
spend
is
it.
based off a home of $175,000 in value times our tax rate. That's how they get that 664. There is a bill pending right now to raise that equation from 175 to a $250,000 house, which will raise that 664 to about 954 or something like that.
So that's what the state would then give to us, that then would cover on top of that.
Yes, and then we would pay up to 954 in that scenario.
And Mr. Campbell, what's the average tax bill in the county right now, do you know?
I don't know that answer.
Well, we're getting ready for Jeopardy. You gotta know taxes for 500.
Take a shot, just take a ballpark. $200, $2,000, something in the middle.
That's a loaded
I don't know the
question.
answer.
And I pay 1950 as the median.
I was gonna say it'd be more like $1,500, $1,400, $1,600, so just average, wouldn't it?
No, no way.
Property tax?
We'll
You think
try to
it'd
get
be
that number
more?
to you guys.
You think the
No,
average?
I think it's less.
Way less.
A
Did
lot
you hear them
less.
say they would probably get that number to us?
Well, we all need to take a guess, and whoever's closest gets ice cream next meeting.
On you?
Yeah, I'm ice cream for one person, sure.
I learned not to guess and throw this around.
Smart.
That's what I was sitting there.
Y'all are asking some excellent questions. I can tell you're really giving this some thought. I appreciate that. So we were looking at some similarities between the two programs. They're both authorized in the Constitution. They both have to follow rules promulgated by the State Board of Equalization. There is an application deadline for both. It's 35 days after the delinquency date, which is February 28th, March 1, however you want to look at that. Both of them require annual application or requalification. Both of them require the taxpayer to provide documentation of age, income, and ownership. Both are for principal residents. Neither affect the assessed value of property, and both have to abide by income limits. So, a lot of similarities there.
How much property goes with your primary residence?
You mean land?
Yes.
It's up to 5 acres, is that correct, Ryan?
Yes, sir.
Ryan's a lot smarter than me. He's gonna take over here in a little bit and do some of this too. So we're looking at some differences real quick between the two programs. We've already kind of covered this, that tax relief is a state mandated, state funded program, whereas tax freeze is a local program. Tax relief is in all counties and all cities. Tax freeze is 23 counties, 33 cities.
Okay, can I ask
Yes, sir.
I'm sure this is a stupid question, but on the tax freeze, there's no assistance from the state on that one. That's all.
There's no financial assistance. We do provide some amount of support, assistance with administering the program.
But there's no
We have
matching.
an entire department dedicated to supporting tax relief. We do not have a department dedicated to supporting tax freeze, but we do have some staff on hand that help with that. You know, if the trustee or the assessor run into an issue, they can always come to us and we can say, oh yeah, we've seen this in another county, and we can give advice and.
Yeah, and I was kind of more or less referring to the financial
Yeah.
aspect of it. I just wanted that to be clear.
Okay. Tax freeze is entirely funded by local dollars.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, it's a surprise to you and me too.
Sorry.
Tax relief administered by the state with the assistance of collecting officials. Whereas tax freeze is administered by collecting officials with the assistance of assessors. Like I said, we do have some limited support capability, but not to the extent that we do for the tax relief program. And I mentioned this earlier, tax relief, the applications are actually approved in Nashville. They're collected locally, submitted electronically to Nashville through a system called Trans, and then they're reviewed and approved in Nashville.
Well, I hate to ask you this question because I'm sure
problem.
we probably already answered it, but
If we have, we probably will. Go ahead.
But, the guideline, like for, I understand tax freeze, the county just says, you know, we're not going, this is where you are at and we're not gonna charge you any more taxes, up to whatever.
Correct. Generally correct.
But is that a state guideline that we, as far as how much you can make before we freeze your taxes in the county, or is that totally up to the county?
It's a state guideline. No, are we talking about?
Freeze.
I didn't understand that question. Maybe
Freeze.
rephrase.
I'm just, I know, you know, a tax freeze is just, you know, we're not, you're froze there, you know, for the next however many years.
Right.
Who makes the determination in a tax freeze what the minimum income or maximum income?
Okay, that is state.
That's the
So it's the same thing.
That's the 42,120.
Correct.
Okay.
It's already been determined.
I wanted to make sense. Since the county is taking all the liability on tax freeze, I just want to make sure that,
Got you.
I thought maybe.
Right, you're not able to adjust that income amount to determine who qualifies or who doesn't.
That's
It's
what
set in statute.
Okay, I've got another question.
That's clear.
On that, so you have to be, is it 65?
Correct.
65 and making less than 42,000.
Right.
Do we have a lot of people who are over 65 across the state? Do you see, like, is that like, let's say we have 100 people that are 65, and would you say 80 of them make less than 42, or is that?
I'm sorry, I don't have any data on that handy. I mean, there might be something up there from the latest
Just seems like-
census.
I think you could take
Well, I mean, there's
your,
Just
this
seems like
number,
701 right here already in the county.
That would
That's
be-
a different, that
But they
is,
would- they would-
that's
they
a
would-
lower amount.
but it
they
would
would
still be close.
automatically qualify. So really the question is between your 31,
No, they wouldn't qualify for this.
Because on tax relief.
It's
the
31,000.
It's 31, so.
This is 42.
Tax freeze, I'd have to add $10,000.
Well, it would
but I'm saying
basically,
anyone who apply or qualifies for relief,
Does not qualify for freeze.
No, it does not
Other way
qualify
around.
for freeze. It's the other way around.
Wait a minute,
I'm the
wait a
same
minute.
way. I get it
Yeah,
backwards
yeah.
in my head all the time.
but there
Yeah,
are,
If you
Yeah.
qualify for tax relief, you do qualify automatically for
for
freeze.
freeze.
Yeah.
there
So
are
we
a
have
lot of
700
couples out there
people
though that
qualify
are
for
living on
freeze.
social security only.
The maximum amount would be 42, so if your 701 citizens make 31,000, they are under the 42,000. They would qualify if they were to apply.
So if you qualify for
Oh,
relief, you
31's
automatically
the max. I was
qualify.
going-
You're gonna have more
Yeah.
than this, but that's at least a ballpark number. You know you're starting out with this
So
number.
whoever's between the 31,190 and the 42,120 is
I was
the
just trying
number
to
we
get a
have.
number. Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
That's
Yeah.
the,
That's
that's
the
probably
number.
the missing link of the whole conversation.
How many is it?
How many people? And I don't know if there's any way for us to even get a close, other than just a guess, is there?
Well,
Chip?
implement the programs. in
I don't
it.
know the
Yeah.
answer. There are ways you can come up with some guesses.
Pass it before we know what's in it kind of thing.
It's gonna be a minimal number, cause there's 54,668 people in Loudon County at the last census. So you'd have to take a look at how many out there would fall into that
You
qualification.
got 36,000 voters, right?
Yeah.
That's got you in your
30%
adult
of
age.
your population's over 65 according to that census.
Here, yeah.
26.9.
26.9 what?
Percent is over
Oh, okay.
65.
years or over.
Like in 2021, we had.
Adam, if you'll get all of their incomes
794
together,
people
we'll,
on the program.
I'll start calling.
thank you.
I want to ask a question. No, is this available anywhere that we can look at? This is an outstanding presentation. Is it?
We can provide it
I
to you. It's
downloaded
not on
it
our
already.
website or anything.
Can I save it and you know it's on?
Sure.
Oh, that'd be, I'd love to have that just to be able to come back and look at.
Okay, sure.
I'm also recording it, so I'll email it to you tomorrow.
Good.
Okay, moving right along.
All right. So the bullet point that popped up when I clicked again, on the tax relief side, the bullet point there's about is a rebate or a credit, and your trustee kind of talked about that, depending on whether they are, have already paid or not paid. But, so tax freeze is not either of those, it is just freezing the tax amount. All right, let's look at some differences. Tax relief is available to low-income elderly, low-income disabled, and disabled veterans and surviving spouses. Tax freeze is available to low-income elderly. It does not touch on the disabled or the disabled veterans and surviving spouses.
Question,
Yes, sir.
as far as tax freeze, say that, in June, we decided to enact a tax freeze for Loudon County. Do we arbitrarily take what the tax rate is now and apply that, or could we look at it and say, we can make it lower than that, or does it have to be what the current tax rate is?
It would have to be what the current tax rate is at the time that you adopted the program. And we do have some slides that look at some timelines about when it's adopted and when the application is made and what year is actually frozen. I think we'll get into some of that kind of explains that a little bit.
But we don't freeze the rate, we freeze the actual dollar amount that a taxpayer pays.
Yeah.
No matter what the rate does, up,
That's what I'm saying.
it's frozen on the dollar amount, whatever they're paying.
Can we just arbitrarily say, everybody's tax is gonna be, regardless of what the, if you're paying $900 now, we're gonna reduce that to 500.
900 is what they're gonna pay forever,
That's it. It freezes.
if you adopt.
Is there a way to remove this freeze in the future?
There is. It would be the same process that it takes to adopt it. It would have to be by, resolution, ordinance, I guess at your level ordinance.
Resolution.
Resolution, I'm sorry, cities or ordinance.
That's right.
Yes. Difference is tax relief, it's revenue neutral at the local level, except in y'all's case where you've opted to match some portion of the tax relief payment. But that's an option that you've chosen, you're not required to do that. So generally, tax relief is considered revenue neutral at the local level. However, tax freeze is what the fancy word is foregone local revenue. It's tax revenue that you have chosen to basically not collect.
Only if it goes up.
That's right.
That's correct, Yeah, if nothing ever changes, then there's been no benefit to the recipient either. Because the recipient only sees the benefit if their calculated tax exceeds their frozen tax. Tax relief is an annual benefit. Tax freeze, the benefit starts when this is what we just talked about, when a tax increase would occur. In other words, theoretically, hypothetically, you could adopt a tax freeze and a person's tax bill today could be $500 and you've frozen their taxes at $500. If their appraised value never changes, if the tax rate never changes, then their frozen tax is $500 and their calculated tax is $500. So the person never actually sees the benefit. They don't actually receive a benefit until that calculated tax has exceeded what the frozen tax amount was. And when the calculated tax is at $700, but their frozen is still at $500, then they are receiving a $200 benefit. So, but ironically, it actually requires their taxes to go up. Their calculated taxes have to go up in order for them to receive any sort of benefit of that frozen amount. Does that make sense?
It does, but help me with that. So we locked in a tax freeze, $500.
Right.
4 years, 5 years from now, Mike goes out and does reappraisals. He reappraisals, but we don't accept the tax rate. We adjust our tax rate back down to
Certified.
a certified rate.
Okay.
Will their property tax go up because we've had a reappraisal, but we kept the certified rate, or will it stay the same? Will it stay at the
It
$500?
will generally stay the same in that scenario. We do have some slides that talk about that. If the property owner didn't change their property, if they made a physical change to their property and that's what caused their value to go up, then you have to do some, and we're gonna have slides to talk about that. You have to do some, between the trustee and the assessor, they have to do some calculations to readjust that frozen amount. If a person built an addition on their home, it would only be fair that their frozen tax gets recalculated to encompass that new addition. Otherwise, that new addition would never be taxed at all. There was a question over here first, and then I said, I'll hand here. And
God forbid the market just tanks and homes that were worth $500,000 are worth $200,000. And their tax bill goes down considerably to $300.
Right.
does that freeze automatically go with it, or is it staying at that $500?
It does go down. It's designed in law so that they receive the benefit of that. If the calculated tax is less than their frozen tax, then
So
they
the
do
freeze
get that benefit.
follows.
So when you said the
Down.
benefit,
No, not
are
the
you
freeze
saying
doesn't go
they
down to
get-
300. It still
If-
would
if
stay
it
at 500, but what they pay would go down to
Does the
300.
freeze go with the number? If their tax bill goes from 500 to 300, is their new freeze 300?
Yes.
Yeah, it's
Why would
gonna
it
go
do that?
down.
Am I saying that right?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
That's
Okay,
a
so
big
then-
deal, I never thought about
That's a
that.
bad, I don't
That-
like that at
yeah.
all.
Okay,
Cause
so
then-
I have a question here. If it's at 500, you're saying their benefit. If it's at 500.
I don't know a better word, I'm saying benefit.
I know that I'm just, at 500, it
Their
drops,
savings.
yeah, to 300. And there's a $200 margin there. Are you giving that $200 to the taxable person?
Their freeze
Well,
drops to
no.
300.
Their
No,
freeze
their
drops,
tax will
so you
just
never
drop.
collect it.
That's right.
And then it never goes back up above 300, I'm assuming, or does it go back up to the 500 in the
Well, it
future?
just depends on what happens. I mean, generally, if they didn't change anything, then you're correct. They would stay frozen at that new lower
Whoa,
amount.
that's not, that's a whole
That's
different.
scary.
That's
The
a whole
only,
different
the only
thing.
why would it be? I mean, why would you exclude them from getting a tax freeze benefit?
Well, if
That's
it
not,
goes
in all
back up,
fairness, that's not it's theoretically possible. It's not a probable.
I've only seen it
scenario.
happen one time in my political career in '09, whatever it was, when we saw property values go down and stuff like that go down, but
Yeah, but think about what you would have to do as a legislative body if the market values did plummet and all of a sudden the assessor's values were much lower than they were 5 years ago. What would you have to do with your tax rate?
raise it.
You would have to raise it.
A lot.
Right, so that offsets, I mean, that kind of takes care of that fear that that tax bill could like plummet along with that value.
They'll have
Most
to
likely
accept
it
the new
wouldn't.
tax rates.
Yeah, that'd be the certified
It'd have
tax
to be the
rate
new
would be
certified
up.
tax rate.
No.
Hand over here.
No.
Does it go with the property or the property owner? Say that we've got somebody that qualifies, but they own 500 acres down here in Erie. Can they cut an acre off, and now they qualify, even though they've still got 499 other acres?
I mean, I suppose it's theoretically possible if they split out an acre with their home and they met the income limits.
If it's set up in a
5
trust, I would
acres is
think
max.
so.
Well, up to 5 acres, yeah.
So they could own 500 acres, and the basis would be the house and up to 5 acres.
Just the home side.
So there's no reason to even whittle it off, because they're just gonna take the 5 acres.
Well, you're right, I misspoke when I said split off, they wouldn't literally have to map out a new parcel ID. But if they qualified based on age and income, then they could get their primary residence and up to 5 acres.
Okay. So no assessment with the freeze, there's no total property assessment involved?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
There's no property assessment involved with the freeze?
There is.
Well,
The
you
assessor
change
still
it.
has to do his or her
It's just
job, in this
irrelevant.
case, his job.
To that
I mean,
person.
They still have to go out and physically inspect the property, maintain the records, notice if there's been any additions, changes made, maybe something's been torn down. Yes, sir.
How do you go about setting the dollar amount? Is that a formula the state gives based on, did we already answer that?
I mean, I touched on the fact that I don't know exactly, it's in the statute, I don't have the statute in front of me, but it does touch upon, something about a median income in each county. It's very clear in the statute, we calculated in the Nashville office, the guy who usually does these presentations couldn't do this evening, a guy named Ken Morrell. Ken actually calculates that for the comptroller's office, and then we share it out with all the
So
jurisdictions.
we wouldn't just say it's set 500.
And that's the 42,120.
And that's not what I'm talking
Oh, I'm
about.
sorry, that's
No,
what
I think y'all are on two
I'm
different.
talking about if I pay $2,000 in property taxes, and how do we come up with the amount that I'm 65 and make 37,000? How do we agree on what the number is?
It's frozen.
It's-
No, it's just
It's
frozen.
whatever you're
It's
paying.
frozen
Currently at that
It's
time.
what you're paying the
That's
day
right.
we
That's right.
adopt it. That's what's
I'm
fixed.
So
sorry.
it'll be different for everybody.
Yes,
Correct. Okay.
yes.
So
That's
what-
correct, that's correct.
So, okay, just that individual person's dollar amount, that's a.
Everybody's would be different.
That was a bad question.
That's correct.
Yeah.
The hard time you have paying them now would continue with the freeze.
It doesn't go lower like you were
Not
saying.
gonna go lower, no, you would still have a hard time the next
Unless
year.
the property base went down.
Touching on a situation you talked about a while ago, if a gentleman had 5 acres and had a trust set up, and he separated the 5 acres in the house from the 499 acres, he'd be in pretty good shape.
I'm not an attorney, I couldn't touch on the trust stuff. I mean, it gets complicated. There's other things in the assessor's office that deals with trust that, I mean, Mike Campbell can answer the question, but I can't answer the question about trust.
I trust you.
So, some differences continuing on here. For tax relief, it's one income limit statewide, 31,600. For tax freeze, it's 31,600 as the minimum, it's the lowest county, but it can go up from there. Tax relief only provides tax relief on a certain amount of value. In other words, the recipient may have a property that's worth, I'm talking about a low-income elderly in this case, a low-income elderly recipient may have a property that's worth $85,000, but property tax relief is only paid on the first $30,000 of that.
If someone owns a lakefront $1.5 million home, docks, boats, whole 9 yards, but their income shows less than 42, they're qualified.
It could happen.
They
And
qualify.
for tax
What,
relief.
Chip?
And can also qualify for tax relief.
Yeah.
We have those.
Because there are ways to shelter income. I mean,
Yes.
990s, there's all kinds of ways you shelter income and stuff like that. So I can see where abuse could happen, there's no question.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a perfect program like this.
Right.
You're correct. In theory, that could happen. Tax relief does not affect your local tax rate. Tax freeze theoretically could, and we'll talk about that.
I wish it could be based on the number in the house.
Tax relief, the state program does not shift the property tax burden. Property tax freeze can theoretically shift the tax burden. And you think about those two bullet points there, in order for those to become true, and they would ultimately become true, but that's more long-term down the road. You know, after you've had tax freeze for several years, if you realize, oh, we're foregoing X number of dollars, you know, we're foregoing $150,000 and we're $150,000 short on our budget, you know, theoretically, you might have to adjust your tax rate to that extra penny you need to make up that difference. And in theory, we all know it's just a fact of life. If you give a benefit to one group, another group, that burden does shift somewhere else. You know, they'll say there's no such thing as free
Can the
lunch.
county unfreeze a
Yeah.
tax freeze?
Yes.
You can abolish it by resolution. To my knowledge, that has not been done.
Revolution or resolution?
Well, you might have a revolution if you pass that resolution.
As he said, theoretically you could, but you
Yeah.
will never do it.
All the
Once
counties
it
and
goes,
cities
it's
that
there
we've
forever.
listed, I've
Once
never
it's
heard of
there,
one,
it's there.
never heard of one, taking it away once they passed it.
Just while we're kind of on that little fuzzy part of it, when I see the number of counties and cities that have it, especially cities, but counties for that matter, why so few?
I couldn't answer that question.
I didn't know if you'd heard feedback other places or something like that. I mean, I can see there's pluses and minuses to all of it, but this, since 2007, this is a tiny number of, especially municipalities that have considered it.
I would just be venturing a guess, you know, who knows? It may be, I think, and of course, y'all are already doing this. I think probably one of the most common answers to that is because they decided instead of foregoing this revenue for tax freeze, we're going to contribute more to tax relief.
Right.
I think that is probably one of the overriding answers, but there could be all kinds of reasons why
Sure,
jurisdictions haven't adopted it. I don't know what that slide was, but it didn't look like it had much on it, so. Tax relief limits, tax year 2021. And I feel like we're getting a little redundant on some of these, so I'm gonna blow through this one a little bit. We're just reminding ourselves here that tax relief has an income limit, it has a property value limit, which is what I talked about a little bit ago for the low-income elderly, or low-income disabled. Similarly, but different, for disabled veterans and surviving spouses, there is no income limit on tax relief. So, that's the will of our General Assembly that has passed these laws, that if you served your country and are a disabled veteran, you can make $1 million a year and still qualify for tax relief. And you can get that tax relief on up to $175,000 on your home. So you could have, you could be a disabled veteran and have a home that's only worth $170,000, your entire tax bill is paid. If you were a low-income elderly and had a home worth $170,000, that wouldn't be the case. The state would only pay the property tax on the first $30,000 of their house.
Right, if I could interject.
Yeah.
And also, if you back up one slide, remember when we're looking.
We don't have to go backwards. Oh, yeah, we do, I'm sorry.
So we're matching
What am I
that,
thinking?
so we're basically, instead of 175, you can double that, and they get their tax bill paid.
That would be one way to look at it.
Yeah, so if we're matching 100%, so you can double both of those numbers.
Okay.
So
You're
you're
covering
saying
up to
that-
that amount, not more.
That's right.
So you're saying on a property value for elderly, you actually consider $60,000?
Well, it's based off, the
Basically.
calculation's off 30, but since we're matching the state's calculation, we're
Double.
basically doubling that calculation.
Gotcha.
Since we're
If the state was saying $60,000 and giving that much, we're actually picking up the other half.
Right.
This is just here for your information, by the way, as like I said, this is a state program, constitution, law, not a local option. This is what it is. You may sit here and have different opinions about this, but this is just for information. It is what it is. There is a section in Tennessee Code annotated that allows, of course, y'all are already doing it, that is actually permitted in the law for you to match the tax relief program. You have to do it by act of the local legislative body. Applies to those categories that we talked about: low-income elderly, low-income disabled, disabled veterans. This is important in a way, and your trustee Chip was talking about this a little bit ago. The tax relief provided by the state and local government combined cannot exceed the total tax amount. So in other words, if the tax relief recipient's total tax bill was $1,000, their disabled veteran $1,000, and the state's gonna pay $750 of it. That only leaves you with $250. You can't match it at the full $750, because then you would be paying them more than what their tax bill was. So you can only match up to what the total tax bill would have been by law.
That's where I thought you were going, Chip. Like if it was exactly 175, then have to pay, and if you matched, they would get it all, plus whatever they're going to, but that
Yeah,
doesn't
you
the
would
case.
actually double the 175, yeah.
You double.
But they wouldn't get, well, what he's saying is they wouldn't, if it was, their value was 170 and they pay up to 175, you don't come back in and say, oh, well, here's your bone.
Yeah, you don't give them $5,000.
Very
Yeah,
few people
that's
do
was
that.
my question.
So, I think I've lost track. At some point, I was gonna hand it off to Ryan. I've got a couple more slides, and then I'm gonna turn it over to Ryan and let him dazzle y'all with
This
his
group
brilliance.
can do it to you.
So,
We baffled the best of them.
so you might be asking, who administers tax relief? We've already kind of touched on that a little bit. Let's look at these roles a little bit more. First of all, you have to adopt it. And then you have to, by law, file that resolution or ordinance if you're a city with the division, with the Division of Property Assessment within 45 days. And then your county trustee has a role in accepting applications, determining eligibility. In other words, they have to review age, ownership, and residency, income. The assessor of property has a role determining what the base assessment subject to the freeze is. In other words, the year that the person qualifies, you have to capture what it was at that moment in time in order to know what the frozen tax amount would be. That has to be captured and documented by the assessor. And then the assessor also has to determine whether it's a total freeze or a partial freeze. And one of our scenarios that you brought up a little bit ago was like the 500-acre tract. That would not be a total freeze. The assessor would have to determine what portion of that tract actually qualifies, and it would be the primary residence and up to 5 acres. Other scenarios, mixed-use properties, if you had some sort of odd residential, commercial, parcel that had some activity of both going on, it would only be the attributable residential portion that could be frozen, no commercial activity
So
going on.
if you lived in a building, you had a store downstairs
Something
and
like
lived
that.
upstairs?
There might be a scenario in which the residence part could qualify, but not the business part.
I don't even know if this goes along with that, but if you have 30 acres and 10 of them are on the front of the lake, when you go out to assess, do you assess it by the acre or just by the plat of land?
That's gonna vary, actually. A lot of times, if it's smaller lots, they tend to be priced by the lot, but they could be priced by the frontage on the lake or the acreage.
We do a lot of unit pricing in, where we have a lot of, sales in one segment of the county. We don't tax under the water. I think that's been asked before. So we look at what we consider shoreline and back.
But they were looking at the 5, if you have 5 acres that are shoreline, that's a lot higher value. But I was just asking, do you do it as a whole, or because the further away you get from the shoreline, the less valuable the land would be? I was just curious how,
When they have to
if you
be
could pick
where
and choose
that
which
residence
5.
is.
Well, it
and
doesn't
that's
say
all
that
that-
up there, though.
I mean,
Maybe
it
it
would
doesn't.
generally be the amount of land that it takes to support the residence and any, auxiliary structure, like a detached garage or
Or a
something like that.
boathouse.
Maybe, yeah. You're asking a great question. I don't know exactly what the answer to that is.
Well, I don't
But it would
see
be one of
that.
those issues that the assessor would have to.
And
would
it's,
have
I'm
to
sure
figure
it's
out.
one it's not very, I was just curious about it.
It would have to be the house, and if it up to 5 contiguous acres, I don't think they let you have a postage stamp house lot and then.
That's not what it says, though.
It would not be that scenario.
It's not implied, is it?
We have learned it less specific.
So, partial freeze is, another example, we've literally just been talking about is where there's they're exceeding the acreage limit. The assessor also has to determine adjustments to frozen base tax amounts, and this is gonna start to get into the weeds, but that's why I'm gonna turn it over to Ryan and let him get into the weeds with y'all, because y'all asked some good questions.
Sound like Mike would be busy then, wouldn't he?
Busier.
And the assessor also assists in verifying ownership of the property. So, Ryan, is this a natural point? Are you ready to take over?
Yeah, absolutely.
Step on up here, please.
A tree fall through the woods, do you tax?
Y'all been a great crowd, by the way. Thank you for your excellent question.
Yeah, we don't get that said very often to us, so we'll take it.
Good job, Ryan.
It's always good to have.
Thank you, Brian.
From the comptroller here.
If y'all don't remember, my name is Ryan Duggan. I'm an assistant director with the Division of Property Assessments, and as Brian mentioned, I'm gonna get down in the weeds a little bit. So I think you guys have asked most of the questions that I'm gonna cover in my slides, so I'll breeze through them, and just like you did with Brian, stop me when you have a question. So when can people sign up? And I think the question was asked, if we enact this in June, can we just pick an amount and, arbitrary amount? And the answer is no. As you see here, we have year A. If you were to enact it in June, it would be the amount of taxes people that qualify would pay in October when they would get their tax bill. So the important thing to remember is that very first year the tax freeze is enacted, no one will see a benefit because it's the taxes you pay that very first year. And I think Brian covered that. You don't see the benefit until a tax rate increase would occur.
I think somebody, you may have mentioned it earlier, in order to qualify, do their taxes have to be current before they can qualify for a freeze or a relief? Say,
Oh, yeah.
Delinquent.
Relief for sure.
Relief for sure.
But they have to be current, I think.
On relief, yeah.
On relief, for sure, tax free, I'm not.
It's a safe assumption, but I'd have to verify that. Well,
Yeah, we could verify that and get back with you, but the
Okay.
the assumption
You
would be
agree?
that, yeah, you have to.
who has that, Commissioner?
That's usually where
Yeah.
it gets.
So, and as we mentioned, we'll get you copies of this presentation. This timeline shows year A, which is the very first year that people are accepted into the program and qualified. The deadline for new applicants runs, there's an overlap. So it actually runs into, as Brian mentioned, 35 days after the delinquency date, which would put you about April the 5th. So technically, between January 1 of the second year and April 5th of that second year, you could be taking applications in 2 years, which gets confusing for the assessor and the collectors involved. Most of our jurisdictions elect to not start taking applications that second year until after April, when the previous year's done. Because working in 2 years it's a lot to keep up with. So, let's see. Who bears the cost of the tax freeze program?
County.
Local governments adopting the tax freeze bear the cost. And I think Brian talked a lot about this earlier. Administering the program between the assessor's office and the trustee's office. The foregone tax revenue due to the program, once a tax increase would occur, of course, is when that foregone revenue comes into play. I think a question earlier, the state does not pay the cost of the tax freeze program, although we do help, we'll answer questions for both the assessor and the trustee when it comes to those real specific income qualification questions like trust. We have our Office of General Counsel will weigh in on those things. And the income requirements for tax freeze and tax relief are very, very, very similar. So if it qualifies for tax relief, as far as income limits and trust, same thing would typically apply for tax freeze. Is there a system available to help administer the tax freeze program? And that's where we at the Division of Property Assessments do come into play. There is a state system available for use by the administrators. It's a secure web-based program where the collector or employees in his office would go in and collect that income verification. They would mark who is qualified for the program. And I'm getting ahead of myself, but because Mike is on the statewide CAMA system impact, it feeds from that website that the assessor marks who is qualified. It actually goes automatically every night into the CAMA system, and then there's a list for Mike and his employees the next day to review and determine determine the amount of frozen. As we talked about earlier, there's a total freeze, and then there's a partial freeze. So if a property was mixed use, if it was a large greenbelt property, Mike's gotta go in there and say the house is frozen, but this massive horse barn is not frozen, and this 1 acre is frozen, but this 49 acres is not frozen. And then, once Mike has done his work, he'll pass it back to the collector and let him know that this person has been assessed, essentially.
And this typically pretty much has to take place annually, each year.
Yes, sir. Because
All that'll have to, because the applicant could have changed something from 1 year to the next, from his horse barn and all that sort of stuff, so it'll have to be done every year.
that's correct. Yep, the recertification on the collector's part, passing it to the assessor, and then the assessor reviewing and making sure nothing has been changed. There's also sales, when that property sells, we talked about that April the 5th deadline. If that property were to sell after that portion, it would still qualify. So if it occurs before that deadline, they would have to catch it. This is where the assessor and the trustee have to communicate and say, hey, this property you transferred to me, they sold it March the 15th, it doesn't qualify. So
The assessor had his hand up, he may have had a question behind you there.
So, I guess my question is, if the trustees take an applications in April, and they send it to us to say these are the ones that are under application, and we have to make that May 20th assessment change notice, are we looking at 45 days if somebody adds a garage or a family room to say your tax freeze was frozen at $500, but now we're doing a partial? Are we going to physically go look at 400 homes in 45 days?
there's a deadline in there. The May 20th deadline for the assessment change notices doesn't really come into play in this instance because it's the tax amount that's frozen.
Okay.
You know, on the assessment change notice that goes out, as Brian talked about, the appraisal, the assessment, the tax rates, all those things still happen as if normal. Appraisals go up, tax rates go up. That is independent of this because the tax amount that's frozen is what is frozen. Now, if you've got like a garage that you're gonna pick up, depending on your timeline when you do it, I don't know if you would do it, within that year after the county board or not, if you would push it for the next year. But there's a requirement, and I have to look in the state board rules, there's a timeline for you, and I think it's 60 days. I don't wanna say right off the bat, but there's, after April 5th, there's a deadline for the assessor to have it done, but it's not by May 20th, it's after that fact.
Okay, thank you.
As I mentioned, online interaction between the assessor and the collecting official, that's what we try to do to help facilitate the program for the administrators. This is a screenshot of what that web-based system would look like for your trustee. I can tell you, it is pretty antiquated, and we're currently undergoing a project to rewrite that, make it a little more modern, make it look a little bit more like the TRAMS project, or the TRAMS application that you know. So down in the weeds, we talked about this at length earlier, but here's a couple of scenarios laid out for you in visual format. So here we have what we call a basic residential property. This would be a total freeze property. As you kind of run down the numbers there, you can see a land value, an improvement value, a total appraisal of $200,000, a tax rate of $3, and a total tax of $1,500. So the very first year that this is enacted, this becomes the frozen amount, and nothing happens. Next year, process goes through, budgets come in, tax rate goes up to $3.40. The appraisal hasn't changed, so this person, their calculated taxes are $1,700, but because they qualified, they would only pay $1,500, and you'd have $200 in foregone revenue. Yes?
What if the property's in the wife's name, but she doesn't make any money, and the husband makes $5 million a year?
If they're both in the household, and I think they actually amended that, when this first came out, I think it was only a person listed on the deed, but now I think it's husband and wife in the household, they do both incomes is the way I understood it. There was a kind of a, I wouldn't say loophole in the beginning, but that was something when this first came out. I remember I worked at the assessor's office in Rutherford County when this was first implemented, and we ran into that situation and actually amended that in statute later on.
Thank you.
So we go to year 3, which is what we talked about earlier, which is the reappraisal year. This is when Mr. Campbell will go through and revalue all the property in the county. We can see that this property has now gone up to $255,000. The tax rate has gone down, certified revenue neutral certified tax rate. It's gone down to $2.80, but the total tax amount has gone up $85, $1,785. This person is still frozen at $1,500.
You lost 85 on that.
What's that?
You lost
285. 285. Total, yeah, the total tax-free savings is 285, and it's 85 from the previous year. We had an increase.
I think I've got most of the nuts and bolts of all this. It comes down to asking Chip and Mike is effect on your office as far as it's gonna cost us. Like I said before, do we have the personnel there right now to do it?
No, I don't. I'm looking at least 1.5 people, be part-time during that period of time, but at least one full-time.
How about you, Mike?
I've talked to a few assessors that are in the program, and it appears that there is a burden on the current staffing. So I don't think we're actually one person short of the statutory number right now. I can hear when I'm going out and looking at the properties that qualify. I don't think we have the manpower to do it.
Would you
It's
only
not
have?
that I'm not willing, I'm hedging my bet to
I just
say,
wanna make sure, when we look at this, we look at everything, all the costs that come with it, and I assume there'd be some additional costs for manpower.
Mike, would you have to go look at every applicant's property, or just be able to tell if they've adjusted a structure based on something from the property assessor's office, a new addition or something?
I think it'd be just like our normal field inspection, we pull up but that's the question is, are we gonna go look at every property that qualifies?
Yeah.
And so, I don't have that answer.
No, I mean, yeah.
I don't have the program, so I don't know, Sean. I'm learning as much as you guys are because we don't have the program, so that's, the program's been, the presentation's beneficial to me as well as you guys.
Looks to me, we already have the tax relief program, so the addition would be the freeze program.
Yes.
And that would require head count. How many would qualify, do you think, for a freeze? The income is pretty
If they
tight.
qualify for the relief.
So there's 478 in the elderly column. Chip, are there any overlaps between elderly and disabled veterans, or elderly and are they counted in both columns, or are they separate?
Those are all individuals.
This is the category in which they
They can only
applied.
But can
win
somebody-
one column.
Right, but I just didn't know if they
Could qualify
counted
for
them
multiple
twice,
columns.
one here, if they were elderly and disabled.
Can somebody be 65 and income and also be a disabled vet? Can they get?
I just wanted to know if they were counted
We have
twice,
plenty of disabled veterans that are not 65 that come
Right.
back and have Agent Orange or.
just so we could have some numbers. Because, when we were speaking earlier, we were using that 701 as the total number, but it wouldn't really be for the freeze. That was just the relief. The number that we would be looking at or working off of here currently is the 478.
Plus, yeah,
But I like
Because
Mike's
that's the
question.
plus
only,
the 72. It's probably.
I like Mike's question though, is like I said, if you have a
what's that?
100% disabled
disabled.
veteran that is 65 and.
But it's just age and income
Could they benefit from all those
for
together?
the freeze.
One of them's disabled, one of them's disabled veteran.
Most of the disabled fall below the 31,000.
Yeah.
In general.
But for the freeze, you only look at age and income. So it would you wouldn't look at any other category on this sheet except for
Well,
the elderly.
some of the veterans though could be over 65 and get the larger amount, right? Some of the veterans could be.
It depends on, that's why I was asking if they were, which,
You cannot be elderly and disabled and get.
so you could have,
774,
you could have some veterans, so your number could go up some. You
So
could
you
have,
only qualify
you
for
could
one
have
column.
some from
That's
each
what I was
category,
asking.
but
Restate that one more time.
it's irrelevant really, but you got 478 in the elderly that are at, meet the 31,000, so they would automatically qualify for the freeze.
Correct.
You've got 72 in the disabled. So some of them could be 65.
Yes.
And you have the veterans, 120, some of them could be 65. And so we don't have that information. So they're just asking like how many,
Yeah.
and this is a way,
Of course, on the veterans and widows of veterans,
Yeah.
we don't track income. And so it'd be hard to say
Right.
which category they fall in.
at minimum 478.
Yes.
Mhm. That's the, if they all apply for the freeze. Okay. I made that worse. I don't think I made that.
You are an educator, right? Common Core.
I know what I wanted and I got it. I don't know if the rest of you got it.
Hey, I'm following.
One thing I will point out on this next example, we'll kind of roll through this, is keep in mind your partial freezes. In this example, we talk about the base residence and base acreage. Anything over and above that, any mixed-use properties, any greenbelt properties, they're gonna have a non-frozen portion that will change, fluctuate year to year. So you may have someone that signed up on a program, and they come in and they say, well, my taxes, the tax rate went up and my tax bill went up, I don't understand this. And you have to explain, well, your entire property is frozen, you've got a partial freeze. So that's something to keep in mind. As Brian mentioned, any commercial use on the property, agriculture, if you've got barns and stuff like that, it wouldn't be frozen at that amount. So when the tax rate goes up, those people will see an increase in that amount.
I think before you really need to define how you're gonna select those 5 acres beforehand. You know what I mean? Because if your barns, you got one barn over here and another one 4 acres away,
Well,
You
it's
know,
actually,
if your property, you know, you can really get some money if you take this barn that's way over here.
so
The
one
max is
thing,
one
in that-
seventy-five though, right?
what's
Where's your
that?
barn at, Pat?
What's that say?
Never mind.
Oh, what I would say is in the state board
Yeah.
rules, when it comes to greenbelt properties, it's not the 5 acres, it's actually only the 1 acre home site. So if you have a property that's 50 acres, you're qualified under the greenbelt program, and you're getting use value on everything but 1 acre, you wouldn't get the entire 5 acres, it's just the 1 acre home site that's at market value, because those other 4 are enjoying use value. You can't really double up on those.
We have a lot of lake homes that build $200,000 boathouses though, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is the boathouse included in the property
And
value?
that's what would have to be determined up front, I
The
think.
boathouse is?
It could be, or it could not be.
If it's-
Depends on if it's more than 5 acres.
Does the statute say that in tax freeze, it's the residence but not the outbuildings?
Well, it's anything that supports the residential structure, so. when
Boy,
you've
a
got-
boat dock sure does.
When you've got a home and a garage, I think we can all say a garage would support the residential structure. If it's a horse barn, probably not, or definitely not. A boathouse, I don't know,
House is the boat.
you'd have to look at those state board of equalization rules that are available on the comptroller's website, and make that determination.
I just didn't want it to kind of be,
Does that make sense?
well, just
Moving right
one
on.
for all, you know, whatever the rule is, just make sure
So.
We would be consistent.
everybody
Yeah,
gets the
yeah,
same
it's-
treatment, yeah.
We will be consistent.
As mentioned earlier, if somebody, Mike will have to watch out for additions to the home, any type of addition to the home, whatever the percentage the appraisal actually goes up, that's what their frozen amount would go up by. If, you know, if they added an addition and added roughly 20% of value, their frozen tax amount would go up by that same 10%. And they're made for physical changes, not judgment calls. As I mentioned earlier, the appraisal process goes on behind the scenes. It keeps rolling just like normal, but this must be a physical addition change. These are just some examples of those: new additions, conversion of unfinished areas, existing improvements. There's also demolitions. What must be done after the first year someone's on the program? So this is a pretty good slide here. As we mentioned earlier, applicants must requalify every year. The collecting official accepts those applications, determines the continued eligibility. They verify the information, review the income, and submit to the assessor. Once it's submitted to the assessor, they verify the ownership, the frozen portions, which is kind of the examples we walked through just a second ago. The assessor verifies and updates the tax freeze amounts and submits it back to the collecting official.
Would it be, yours or Chip's, would the county then have to by mail notify people every year to come and reapply for their freeze? Do y'all have to send out the letter, or?
We do on tax relief, so I assume you'd be sending out one also for this.
So we have to send, or y'all have to send the letter out every
We
year?
send- and
Just
then when
like they
don't
send your
respond,
tax
we
bill.
send another one out, and then we call. So we usually speak with each of those people twice at least on tax relief.
Okay.
I'd be standing in line for tax relief. Nobody have to be harassing me.
So, to talk about reappraisal year, once again, what we talked about, those properties are revalued just as if they were not on tax freeze. So when Mike is doing his revaluation, he's not looking, because once again, I hope everybody remembers from the beginning, it's the tax amount that's frozen, not the appraisal, not the assessment, not the rate. So Mike's appraising these properties just like he is everybody else. So during that reappraisal year, if you were to sign up that year, whatever that rate is that year would become your new base frozen, or would become the base frozen amount for you since it's your first time on the program. And for requalifications, it's like any other year. As long as it doesn't, as long as you've not made a physical change, you're frozen at that base amount. And then as we talked about earlier, if the property value were to go down during that revaluation year, that would become your new frozen amount. And it gives, let's see here. 2014 was when that law change happened. Prior to that, the frozen amount would stay what it was forever, and if it dipped down, they got the benefit, but if it went back up and stayed under the old frozen amount, it would go back up to that too. So in 2014, in this example, the first year, we're frozen at $800. The second year, something happens, tax rate goes down, it drops to $700, that becomes your new frozen amount. And then in the third year, it goes up to $775. but because it hit the lowest point it ever hit at 700, that's where it stays. There is a requirement to report tax freeze totals to the Division of Property Assessments, and that's by state board rule. And I'm gonna skip all of that because Mike is on impact, we do this for you. So you don't have to report those totals, we'll take care of that.
Right. What happens if the property changes hands?
If the property sells. So if it sells prior to that April 5th deadline,
No, you said example in the previous slide.
the,
It went up, it went down. Now that owner sold it, and there's a new person that doesn't qualify. What's the tax rate on that house?
it's whatever the calculated tax would be.
Goes back to normal.
So it goes back to the calculated rate,
Goes back, yeah.
that's what I said earlier.
If you're not on the tax freeze program, if the property were on tax freeze and then it sells prior to that, April 5th deadline, it would just be whatever the calculated taxes are, appraisal times 25% times divided by 100 times tax
It's
rate.
right back to where it was.
We started that.
That's an hour and a half ago.
Moving right along.
Yep, here we go. We're in the home stretch, I promise. Remember, the entire property may not be frozen due to acreage or mixed use. That's an important thing to remember. Frozen tax amounts are adjusted by the assessor to reflect physical changes. That's another area where some of these recipients could see an increase. And it is the tax amount that is frozen. And as Brian mentioned earlier, we have some people in our office that help the assessors and the trustees with this process. For you guys, it would be Ms. Vaughn Larson in our Nashville office. And we've got some web links we can provide in the presentation to you also. Any last questions?
What if you're in a green belt?
If you're in a green belt, it's the residential house and 1 acre, which is that market value. It's only one, they specify that specifically in state board rules.
But the other stays in green belt?
Other stays in green belt.
Thank you guys very much for
Thank
taking
you.
your time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Appreciate you
Thank
making
you. Thank you.
And Tim, are you gonna email us that?
Hey, Ron.
Thank you.
That'd just be good to
One
have.
thought was on there, when we're doing the budget, we're passing out the 15 sheets on our assessment roll. Something that Ryan.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. So, we mentioned earlier in the presentation that, tax freeze may or may not affect your tax rate. So the thing to remember is, we've talked about the number of people that may or may not apply, maybe it's 400 or 700 or however many it is. When Mike passes you that assessment roll, as I mentioned, the appraisal process goes on like normal. So these properties are gonna show an assessed value of X amount. And when you're figuring your budget, just keep in mind, these properties that are on the tax freeze, you're not gonna get the assessment times the tax rate on those properties. You'll have to figure those separately to understand that you're only gonna collect a smaller amount on those, potentially smaller amount.
But you would be able to tell us what that is, roughly.
Yeah, we can provide you a list of the properties that are on tax freeze, their current assessed value, and their frozen tax amounts.
So we'll see the difference in how much we're losing.
Yes.
Hey, thanks, everybody.
And I guess everybody figured out that the 3 pages stapled together, I put some on the chair, but everybody got one of those. Those actually came from me. So you got a 56-year tax history of the county summarized for you. The second page is the Tennessee freeze jurisdictions, and I took the liberty of writing out the current tax rates for those ones that participate.
We wondered what the little ink parts were.
Yeah, and then if you're flipping to the third page, the little graph, the red line is where we're setting right now at a tax rate, and the blue line is graphed out the 23 counties down below. So, you'll see, Bradley County is, approaching us, and then Sevier County is actually just under us.
I'm disturbed by that. How's that possible?
Well, so Bradley County, in the summary of the tax rates for this last year, only Sevier County is below our rate.
Do they have schools, different school systems?
It's under, you look at the tourism, they're.
But do they have school systems?
Do they have a school system?
Well,
Yeah.
some people have,
Special school district.
special school districts, it's not included in their tax rate. So there are people that have lower tax
Yeah,
rates,
not-
but their
yeah.
schools are separate than
No.
their
Those are
tax
all-
rates.
well,
Sevier County
The
has
two
their
counties that I didn't verify, or maybe three, was, they're west
Those would be
counties, I didn't.
Those would be the ones with those special school districts.
Yeah.
Gibson County is one of those.
Gibson,
Oneida is a special.
You'll see some with
Oh, is it really?
with a 98-cent property tax rate and stuff like that, but they've got special school
York
districts, so
Institute or
it's
York
not
High School is
same.
always the only school in the state that is still
We have
operated by
the
the
second
state
lowest
of
tax
Tennessee.
rate in the state.
so I verified this morning that, like Bradley County, if you look at Bradley County, they actually have a fire district, so their rate was, I think there was I forgot the percent, but it's $1.77, so that puts us, somewhere in the bottom end of the actual rates,
Every time you go to Dollar
across
General,
the state
you have
down
to say-
95 counties, and it's a little bit hard because you have to look at, I think one county's got 7 school districts, and each one is a little bit different. But you also, in that graph, you'll see, the tax rate numbers, so most of them in the $2.50 range versus theirs at $1.52.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate you coming, Mike,
Thank you,
Chip.
Mike. Chip, yes, please, thank you all.
I think the next thing
Y'all
will
can
be,
leave if you want to, or you can stay.
Are you driving back? Are you driving back tonight?
I think we'll head out.
Are you driving back tonight?
We are staying in Crossville. We have a meeting in Cookville tomorrow morning, so it just made sense to go ahead and stop in
what do you
Crossville.
got, about an hour
Godspeed.
away?
Hit the road.
Yep, thank
Thank
you
you
all.
all.
Thank y'all.
Thank
If
you.
y'all have any questions, just let us know.
Okay.
Okay, I think where we go with this, we have to take a look at the overall impact with head count and everything. So we'll have to get some more numbers before we put this to a vote. Anybody disagree with that?
Well, I think you're on the money. You
Okay,
gotta know what.
all right.
My turn?
Bill Satterfield, tell me about the
30 seconds.
convenience center.
Just had the continuing requests from some of the folks that live over in the Greenback area about the convenience center operated by the county. And by the way, everybody over there thinks it's the best thing that's come along since sliced bread as far as what it's done for our community over there, so we appreciate that. I myself have participated in undercover work, following people from out of county, following them into the convenience center there at Greenback and dumping their garbage that's coming in from other counties into our convenience center. And also people coming in with things that are officially banned from our convenience center that are not supposed to be done. And like I said, if we weren't paying, how much is it? $22.40 per ton that comes out of our tax dollars to haul that down to the dump, I wouldn't have a problem with it. But there's not another landfill facility around that doesn't charge. If you go to Blount County, a minimum, it's $10 to pull onto the ramp. So I don't know. I'm just, here representing folks that are concerned, and
What
I
do
am
you want us to
too.
do? What do you want us to do?
I looked, at
Can we
things
check
like,
IDs when people pull in?
well,
That's it.
I'll tell you what I had to do. Like I said, since over half of my farm is in Blount County, and I wanted to use the Blount County Library, but you had to be a Blount County resident. So I had a choice of either a utility bill or a property tax receipt. So I took my property tax receipt to the library and got my library card. At the convenience center, you can't use license plates on cars. You can't use driver's license because those aren't accurate. Like I said, the two things that are accurate is either you bring your certificate from the trustee's office that says you paid or your taxes, or if you're renting, you bring a utility bill that shows. Now, I don't know if there's a master record of people that live in the county or not, but with that, if you do that, then you get a little sticker that sticks on the car windshield, and when you drive in, the people working there can see it, and you can dump your garbage. If you don't have it, you gotta move on.
Why won't driver's license work? If I pull in there and show up, yep, mine says.
Well, we got, like the animal shelter, we keep a book over there, like, You get down here in Erie, down in Luttrell, you may have a Loudon or Philadelphia address, but you may live in Monroe, McMinn, or Kingston.
Yeah.
And so now we can do one of those, and anybody, of course, I think, know a lot of folks, but somebody they know, then we can ask to verify, look it up in that. If not, tell them not to come back, and at that point, we can put a little sticker like a pass or.
The big thing is that somebody has to enforce that.
That's the.
We're in a
I
place
mean,
now where we can.
they pull up here and I'm ready to load my trash
Well,
and your guy's gonna stop, you can't dump trash here.
we've got some folks there now that are doing that, that have made people leave, that are trying to bring stuff in not supposed to. But like I said, you get those adhesive stickers that you put on there, and
What do you do when you
They
sell
need
your
to get my
car?
cardboard out of the
What do you
recycler.
do when your car's gone?
just make sure that you got a card with a sticker on it. That's all, I'm just, I don't wanna make it bigger than it is, or whatever, but it is a problem, and like I said, when we say you argue over pennies every year in the budget, and we're wanting to freeze taxes and whatever, I have a problem with giving away tax dollars to haul out-of-county residents' garbage away. So, that's the thing, and those folks over there do a really good job at the convenience center. Some of them may be a little overzealous, but,
I hate to agree with Adam, but I don't know why the driver's license doesn't work.
Because you've got Blount County addresses in Loudon County and vice versa.
But doesn't it say what county you live in?
No.
no.
Never mind now.
Just a few miles down the road, you go to a place called Trigonia, which is just, I don't know, 2 miles down the road from
Three
Greenback.
counties, Trigonia.
It's 3 counties. You should be familiar with them because we get kids that live over there that get off the bus in Monroe County and walk home to Loudon County. But there's Monroe, Loudon, and Blount all right there. And I hate to be chintzy about it, but like I said, I live off Morganton Road, and I've watched people with trailers full of carpeting and carpeting padding and everything hauling down Morganton Road, knowing exactly where they're gonna go. They're gonna go to our convenience center because they don't have to pay.
Let me ask you, Bill, does Blount County not have convenience centers like we do?
No.
They don't provide that? Well, let me throw this part out
Where's
there.
their dumps? Do they don't have dumpsters?
Alcoa runs it.
Alcoa runs the landfill.
It's $10 if you take a truck.
So if you live in the
load or a
county,
bag of
there's no,
garbage,
you
it's
get,
$10.
They run it for all 3 entities. Blount, Maryville, and Alcoa have one landfill, and Alcoa is the managing partner. They manage the landfill.
so you have to drive
So
all that
you
way?
have to have-
There's not
yeah.
one.
That's it for Blount County.
Wow.
Well, let me throw you this little option, this little thought out. When I first got involved in convenience centers and all that, you learn a lot of stuff. Chris will have read a lot about this. The whole idea behind the convenience centers and why the state really likes them and presses them is to keep trash out of the ditches, out of the gullies, out of the fields and stuff. So just playing devil's advocate, the Blount County guy that pulls in with 2 bags of garbage, chances are he's gonna go right down to the side road somewhere and toss his 2 bags of garbage. I mean, and I'm not saying it's good or bad, but the idea was to keep trash out of the ground.
Well, the possibility, and that's true, but then the many truckloads of insulation, 2x4s, sheetrock, mattresses, bed springs.
When somebody brings in a big load versus just some trash, why can't they look up in our property tax database and see if it matches the ID?
The easiest thing is you get your sticker, put it on your windshield, and when you drive through, you're either legal or you're not.
How easy is that, Chris? You like the sticker?
Sticker would probably work, I mean.
I can't think of anything else.
That
Well,
seems
we
like
need
a
to
simple
have,
thing.
That'd be the
Well,
simplest.
let's hear
the
what
property
Chris has
assessor, when they send down our
Hey,
tax
let's hear
bill.
what
we
Chris
can
has
just
to say.
Put stickers.
Go ahead, Chris.
You could possibly be better maybe with the laminated card, and if there is a question, maybe show a card, cause,
Well, laminated card is, you live in Little City, here's my card, you go bring your garbage and dump it in the
Tinker,
greenback.
don't be
Who
cheating
was
on
it said
crap.
about the tax bill? Was that you?
Yeah,
Who said it?
Somebody down there.
Oh, yeah, maybe put a sticker in with the Greenback, if you got a Greenback address, put it in the property tax. And
that'd work, I mean, that'd
you
be.
may have some rental properties that you have to deal with, but that would narrow it down as far
My-
as.
That'd be a good way to distribute.
my viewpoint on this, if you own property in the county of Loudon, then you can use our convenience centers, whether you got a house there or not, if you own property, I don't have a problem with that. I do have a problem though, if we didn't argue over tax dollars every year, I have a problem paying whatever it is a ton
22.
to this outfit down here that is supposed to be running our solid waste, and like I said, we had to foot the bill for it. And like I said, I think it's substantial. Like I said, I see it. I followed one load from, Monroe County the other day, all the way up 411, turned off and followed them in to the convenience center, and it had been at a construction site.
Did you ask them about it?
No, I just followed them over there. The guys that
He's
work
just a
there do
fact
that.
finder.
Coach, they're not supposed to take construction.
I know.
I was just gonna ask about the,
Yeah, they're not supposed to be
We
taking
run a
that.
lot, we run a lot out of Green Bay.
We've got some guys over there now that are stepping up and enforcing it. I'm just, like I said, I don't wanna, have to call out the state militia and have an armed guard over. I'm just saying, it should be very simple for a month or whatever, hand them out a bulletin. Says, starting June, whatever, you will be required to apply for and get a sticker for your vehicle. And this is what you need to do it, and you need to see Kelly Brewster at the convenience center between the hours or whatever, and she will
Wait
issue
until
your
it's
sticker.
July, when it's good and hot.
But, and once they've got that, then if that vehicle happened not to be there that day, I'm sorry, it just makes
Right.
operating it easier. You put the sticker on the window, you drive through, the easiest thing is, it's no controversy, and just let anybody that comes, wants to come, and dump whatever it is they wanna dump. But that's on our dime.
Now, while we're talking about stickers,
Mhm.
in a serious note, you might wanna get the ones that can come on and go off, so
yeah.
that they sell their car or whatnot.
Oh, I want the
And then you
acrylic
got,
plastic.
I do have to say
Clean,
this
the
much,
cleans.
then you're back to, I'll peel mine
Yeah,
off.
I mean, I
You're
guess,
gonna have
Well,
some
it's like the
people,
tax
it'll
thing
probably
right
be
here.
less than,
You're gonna have cheaters.
you're gonna have people cheat. This
I'm
is-
but I like that idea.
Yeah.
Your, your problem is location.
Yeah, we're right there at the three-county line.
Well, and you've got Blount County that charges, Monroe County charges, so.
That's why they're coming.
How about if I sit down and talk with Chris a little bit, and we can maybe come up with an idea that he likes, it's his bailiwick.
You could always,
But I just think something like that, something easy.
You gonna have your name on the sticker?
I'll say, if you
got a
have.
Satterfield
Doesn't say Satterfield on it.
I'll say, call, who's in charge of it now, Republic?
Yeah.
Call Republic, if you
I think that's a good idea, Bill.
Well, it
Work
just,
with Chris and see if he can come up with a solution sticker.
Well, they wanna do it everywhere.
Chris has a lot of money, so he can afford to do it.
putting in
he's got
When
one
you
over
do
here.
it,
Alright,
out of
Loudon's
county,
pretty ruthless
if they
catching
come
coming
in
in.
and they're not from
Well,
Loudon
Loudon is so
County.
centrally
well,
located.
it'd be,
somebody
it
did
would
that
need to be something that would help,
there's a-
at least so
and,
Chris could break even.
Rome County come in,
what it
other
costs.
cities. Rome County's got one right there at the county line, so.
Right.
But we'd
got
have,
them took care
we'd
of.
have to hire somebody to.
You may have a few slides.
They ain't gonna collect that money, and you gotta keep up
Of
with it.
course, of all the people, he makes more money than anybody in the county.
I know, that's what I'm saying.
Tracy Blair, take us through the budget amendments.
Yes, sir. On the next, agenda, you will have a resolution to accept the donation to the animal shelter. You will have two grants to approve application and acceptance. The budget committee is recommending that Greenback School be reimbursed for materials that were used to purchase, to make the podium. And
Did that go through,
it did. It's a
100%, or was there a dissenter?
We wanna send y'all a letter and tell you, we're buying your podium for you all too.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
And also you'll have budget amendments, and that is all from the budget committee.
I just said maybe
Okay.
the school board will make a little.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Hey, Tinker, listen up a minute.
I'm listening.
Well, you're gonna
Thursday
call somebody.
is the deadline
Hit me.
for, anybody to withdraw from the ballot of the election. So I didn't
Are
put it
you
on the agenda.
withdrawing?
You want me to withdraw?
Are you wanting to withdraw?
I'm gonna give Tinker one of them looks.
Man,
By next commission meeting, Commissioner Duff and I should have an appointment, a name for an appointment for the school board seat. We were right up to the tail end, and we only had one candidate, and then the second one jumped in, cause it was gonna be real easy, we just appoint that one candidate, but now we have two. So we're not gonna pick sides on the race, that's a Republican race on both sides, so we'll let them work that out, but we'll have somebody to, recommend to fill in the 3 or 4 meetings, however many they have between when we appoint August.
You bringing that to March 7th or the
Yeah.
15th?
we'll vote on it the March, whatever the March meeting is, 7th.
March 7th,
And if you want some worthless trivia, if an incumbent drops out at this point in time, they have to reopen up
for 7 days.
reopen up that race.
Oh, really?
Yes, they did.
Like if you withdrew, or Van or Harold, they'd have to reopen that district, that up for 7 more days for somebody else to have an opportunity.
Well, in this case, neither one's an incumbent, so that shouldn't be part of the problem.
Okay,
I didn't know that.
any further?
That was new information.
Make a motion to
Entertain a
go home.
motion to adjourn.
Big rain's coming.
I got a signature.
Got that on so you can see the car?
Yeah, yeah.
You scared?
Tell him to